So I have the bestest wife ever. For Valentine's Day, she bought me this. And it's an replica 1850 foot officer's sword. And I've been wanting this sort of for a very long time. And it's got quite a story behind it. I haven't even wiped the preservative off of it yet. But it feels very light in the hands for the length. It's 31-inch blade. My point of balance is about 6 inches ahead of the guard there. And I'll get into that a little while later. It feels lighter and livelier than my 1860 light cavalry saber, and it's a straighter blade too. But anyway, so I enjoy sport fencing, and I enjoy collecting swords, knives, whatnot, and I enjoy fictional swords. For example, I wanted, after the Schwarzenegger Conan movie, I wanted Conan's Jody Sampson sword so bad. And then in books, I would like to get a copy of Stormbringer from Michael Moorcock's Elric of Melniboné series. I would love to get one of those. And I love fencing scenes. Books that have really good fight scenes in them with swords. I like swords. So one of my favorite books is by Robert Heinlein. It's called Glory Road. It's my second favorite of his. Starship Troopers, I think, is my favorite, and it's a must-read. And do not base anything you believe on the movie. The movie had nothing to do with the book. The book is completely different. Has nothing to do with the movie or fascism, either one. But it's a superb book. But anyway, Glory Road is one of my favorite books. And in it, the protagonist, the true hero of the story, Oscar Gordon, he gets a sword. They lay out a bunch of weapons for him to go through and find the ones that he's going to carry. And I'll read the description. One of the things Heinlein described very accurately, the sword here. Let me see. Okay, I found there the blade that suited me the way Excalibur suited Arthur. I've never seen one quite like it, so I don't know what to call it. A saber, I suppose, as the blade was faintly curved and razor sharp on the edge and sharp rather far on the back. But it had a point as deadly as a rapier, and the curve was not enough to keep it from being used for thrust and counter quite as well as chopping away meat axe style. The guard was a bell curved back around the knuckles into a semi-basket, but cut away enough to permit full moulinet from any guard. It balanced in the forte less than 2 inches from the guard, yet the blade was heavy enough to chop bone. It was the sort of sword that feels like an extension of your body. The grip was on a shark skin molded to my hand. There was a motto chased on the blade, but it was so buried in curlicues that I did not take time to study it out. This girl was mine. We fitted. I returned and buckled belt and scabbard to my bare waist, wanting the touch of it, and feeling like Captain John Carter and the Gascon and his 3 friends all in one. I drew my sword and glanced along it, feeling its exquisite balance, while noting again the faint ripples left by the feather-soft hammer blows of some master swordsmith. I tossed it and caught it by the forte. Read the motto, Star. She traced it out. Dum vivamus, vivamus. While we live, let us live. So that was, and he refers to it as the Lady Vivamus later, and really likes his sword and gets to do a lot of various adventures and whatnot with it. So I've been, it's a pretty good description of the sword. So I've been sort of looking around. There's generally guys out there that are making copies of various fictional swords. And Albion actually made one that's endorsed by the Heinlein Society. They give it away as part of their Heinlein Prize. And it's a high quality blade, I'm sure, but it does fit the description fairly well. But to my mind, there was just something a little off by it. It looked a little heavier. For example, in the book, Oscar engages an opponent who's using a long rapier, and he's keeping up with him pretty well, which with a heavier blade might be a little difficult. So I was like, yeah, it looks more like a John Carter sword than an Oscar Gordon sword, sort of. But it was also like $2,500. Yeah. So anyway, so I was looking around, seeing if there was anything sort of similar that I could pick up as a historical repro or whatever. And this is a reproduction here. So I came across people discussing what kind of sword it was and what would best represent it. And I found one fellow who actually contacted Heinlein as Tom Maringer, and he made custom swords. And he got a response from Heinlein. This is back in 1981. Dear Mr. Maringer, I am most pleased to hear that you are willing to put your art to work to make the Lady Vivamus. But I must tell you that the Lady Vivamus already exists. She is hanging on the wall 6 feet from me with her scabbard and sword belt, and underneath her motto, Dum vivamus, vivamus. She is my navy dress sword, worn by my brother before me, by my oldest nephew after me, and now she is retired until another Heinlein has need of her gracious service. Back 1,000 years ago, well, 54 years ago, when I was a minor champion with dueling sword, I noticed that my dress sword had excellent balance either as a rapier or as a saber. Not as near perfect in either role as is a specialized blade, but very possibly more practical, more lethal than either saber or epee of today. At least that is how I felt about it. I am always happy with that sword in my hand. When I wrote Glory Road, I simply described my Navy sword. The half page of description is precise, but I see that I did not give the size, 31 inches guard to point. I found your brochure most interesting. In these sorry times, I would never have expected to find an artist making a vocation of custom swords. I would not have guessed that there still existed a market. So few today seem to have any appreciation for honest steel. Good luck to you. May your feet never slip and your wrist never tire. Sincerely, Robert A. Heinlein. Which sort of settles the matter. This is what it is. So it's a model 1852 Navy officer sword. Now the thing is, the model 1852 has gone through various incarnations. The original, the blade width was actually about 1 1/8 inches, and almost immediately they shrunk it down to 1 inch. Then about World War I, when Heinlein's sword would have been made, it went down a bit smaller. The current models are only about 5/8 of an inch, very light blades. Of course, they're purely ceremonial at this point. So I can find a replica of the 1852. However, it's going to be the modern blade width, and I wanted the little heavier, basically a working sword, working blade. So again, a little more research. I find out that that pattern is virtually identical to the 1850 foot officer sword, US 1850 foot officer sword. Only difference is a naval motif, and the etching in the side is a little different, and so on. But as far as hilt, blade, everything like that, 1850. Well, guess what? They make historical reproductions of the 1850 very inexpensively. This was less than $150, and it's a solid working sword. It's made Windlass out of India, so it's good steel. The hilt's on tight, the whole thing. So other than the fact that it's leather rather than the white shark skin that would have been on the naval blade, and then of course the etching is different. It doesn't say Dum Vivamus Vivamus. The blade length is spot on. It's obviously a little heavier profile because, as I said, my point of balance is about 6 inches out, whereas on Heinlein's it was 2 inches, which just tells you he had the slightly lighter blade. But I do like I'm a big guy, and I like a little bit of weight out there, so I do like a little bit of heavier blade myself. So as far as I'm concerned, it's absolutely perfect. I have, a working model of the Lady Vivamus from one of my favorite all-time books. So, but that's how I came about to get this one. And then one of the guys online actually contacted Windlass, and he had them make up one of these without the etching, and then he had it etched with Dum Vivamus Vivamus. So he has one that's even closer, perhaps, than this. But as I said, functionally, this is what Oscar felt in his hand while he was battling his various enemies, And it's a double fuller design. As I said, it's got less curve than my 1860. The hilt's better in that I can get a true saber grip on it or a hammer grip. The 1860 is not really comfortable in a saber grip, but of course it's designed for slashing anyway, so the hammer grip might be more suited. The wire wrapping on this one's better. The one on the 1860 bites pretty good. If you got calluses, you're good, or if you're wearing a glove, it'll work, but it's a little uncomfortable barehanded otherwise. This one, the wrapping's nice and tight. Now, the only downside to this is that the handle itself is a bit small. And what I may or may not modify it, I don't know. I can just wrap some grip tape around it, build it up a little bit, or I could pull it apart and put a slightly larger core in there and then rewrap it or whatever. But as it is, it's functional. It's perfectly fine. Except if I were using it for a long period of time, I think my hand might get a bit tired. But of course, I do have large hands, so. But I saw some of the original 1852s were a bit more built up and had a little bit more curve at the butt here. But as it is, this, like I said, I picked it up. I couldn't believe how light it felt. It balances just marvelously, and with a slightly lighter blade, it would be even livelier. And I can see why Heinlein really likes his sword. And yeah, it's plenty heavy enough to chop bone. It's not like a big old broadsword or whatever, but yeah, you can chop with it. And more importantly, it is light and lively enough that if I were to face somebody with a rapier, I wouldn't feel too undergunned, as it were. Now, I do personally still prefer my rapier, and that would be for dueling basically against an unarmored opponent. In battle, I prefer something a little different. Maybe more something like a backsword or whatever. And against armored opponents, of course, you need something big enough to really thump them. But for a fantasy blade, for adventuring against various creatures and whatnot, this is pretty darn good. But the main thing is, as I said, I've got my version of the Lady Vivamus, and Madi bought it for me, and she's, oh, it's not perfect. She wants to get it engraved. As far as I'm concerned, it's perfect. It's great. I love it.